Start. Shall we start, please? Shall we start, please? Can somebody close the doors and we settle down to start? Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Brian Makeketa. Together with myself, there is Ms. Christelle Pillay. The two of us, we shall be jointly running the program for today's launch of the two reports from the two Chapter 9 institutions, the CRL Rights Commission and the South African Human Rights Commission. Before we start, may I make a request that we all stand and observe a minute silence in honor of the life lost on the day of July 2021. As respect to the lives that we lost, just a minute silence. Thank you very much. Commissioners from the South African Human Rights Commission, commissioners from the CRL Rights Commission, members of SABC Provincial Office from representing SABC in KZN and the MEC here present, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. Following the July 2021 unrest that engulfed Phoenix and the surrounding areas, the two constitutional bodies, that is the CRL Rights Commission and the South African Human Rights Commission, pursuant of their legislative mandates, held hearings with relevant stakeholders to try and understand what happened. Subsequent to the hearings, they both produced reports with findings and recommendations. We are gathered here together to hear those findings and recommendations that comes out from these two constitutional bodies, the CRL Rights Commission and the South African Human Rights Commission. Without wasting any more time, let me call upon the CEO of the CRL Rights Commission, who shall, on behalf of both Chapter 9 institutions, the CRL Rights Commission and the South African Human Rights Commission, welcome all of you to this event. And in the process of doing so, he shall also be introducing the leadership of these two Chapter 9 institutions, that is the CRL Rights Commission and the Human Rights Commission. Mr. Edward Mafatsa, over to you, sir.
A very good morning to you all. Thank you so much, Program Director. As indicated, I'm Edward Mafatsa, the CEO of the CRL Rights Commission, and my task this morning is quite simple, and perhaps I believe it will be the shortest in terms of the allocated time. Let me start by sending compliments of the new year to you all, because we've just met for the first time this year in this fashion. As you may all be aware, the CRL Rights Commission and the South African Human Rights Commission, which are the two Chapter 9 institutions, embarked on an investigation after the incident of 2021, which ended up in some kind of a turmoil between the Indian and African community in Phoenix and surrounding areas. Let me start by apologizing, although it is not my tendency to do so when we start meetings. In the context, it is appropriate to apologize to communities and families that had actually waited for this report for this long. In-depth consultations with relevant stakeholders and slow responses to other parties that needed to furnish the Commission with information in order to complete the reports has been part of the contributory factors that led us to some delays in releasing these reports. In the process, some commissioners who were involved in this matter had taken up some calls to serve the country in other spaces, while others, the term that was allocated to them in this commission came to an end. Nevertheless, we appreciate the time and moment in which we find ourselves this morning. The launch of these reports by the two constitutional bodies is a critical one. The two reports will obviously be presented by each individual institution based on their individual mandates. It is in this context in which we would request all of us to engage them with that in mind, as that foreground the strengths and limitations the two bodies might have experienced in drawing the conclusion of the reports. To an extent, informing the findings and the recommendations of both. Ladies and gentlemen, the two institutions are led this morning by their chairpersons and commissioners in this launch. The CRL Commission is led by Professor Luca David Musoma, physically present here, I'm sure you see him in the front, and the South African Human Rights Commission led by Commissioner Nissen. Let me quickly introduce the commissioners from the CRL Rights Commission, and we will do so with the Human Rights Commission. CRL Rights Commission, we have the Deputy Chair, Dr. Sylvia Pito. She's sitting on my extreme left. And we also have Commissioner Mbele, who is sitting here in the front, and Commissioner Msala, I saw her in the middle, and Commissioner Khatla, I saw her as she was walking in on my extreme right, Commissioner Advocate Abdurov in the middle, and Commissioner Dlamini, extreme left, and Commissioner Chamzashe just here in the front. Thanks, Commissioner. From the Human Rights Commission, we have the acting chairperson, Commissioner Fatima Cohen. She's attending online. And we have Commissioner Ntuli just next to me here in the front. And we also have Commissioner Matlingosi sitting here in the front. We have Commissioner Bosov, also just after the cameras there. Commissioner Kwinana here in the front, and Commissioner Gungubele in the front here. And that is the list that was brought to me this morning. Let me also extend a special welcome to the representatives of government and civil society, NGOs that were also active in this matter, including members of the media. I may not exhaust the list, but what was brought to my attention for this purpose, we have amongst us the family members of the deceased that are present. We also have victims of violent attacks that are here, representatives of the South African Police Services. We also have INANDA, PSIRA, NPA, DEFSA, Gandhi Development Trust, KZN Provincial House of Traditional Leaders, community members from Phoenix, KwaMashu, Verulam, Inanda, Mbambai and Zwelicha, KwaZulu-Natal Council of Churches, members of interfaith organizations, civil society and SANCO specifically, youth structures, and so on and so forth. If there are any casualties, ladies and gentlemen, I will manage it as we go. Thank you so much, Program Director.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mafadza, for the introductions and for the welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, before we go on, I've been advised that the National Commissioner and his deputies from SABC are also here. We acknowledge your presence and welcome. We move to item number 2 of our today's program. And with that, we shall be inviting the Chairperson of the Human Rights Commission, Commissioner Chris Nissen, who will be joining us live via the link. I think our technicians will help us, for him to say a few remarks. Unfortunately, he's not here with us. He's in Geneva on a work-related trip, but he felt strongly that he would like to make few remarks on occasion like today. So I don't know if we are ready with the live streaming. It's technology, it's not me.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good morning, program directors, both to you and that of the Human Rights Commission. Good morning to all of us present. When the CEO of the Human Rights Commission said this heat, I thought it was the tension in the meeting, but he described it as this load shedding. So thank you for that, CEO of the Human Rights Commission, Vusamusi. Colleagues and friends, everybody's been introduced and everybody's been welcomed already. I just want to make a few remarks. I'm sorry that I couldn't be there today because I'm attending the United Nations Subcommittee on the Prevention of Torture today. This was planned a long time ago before I became chairperson of the Human Rights Commission. Let me say the following: all our commissioners have been acknowledged, and I just want to acknowledge Professor Musoma, and also, of course, the Deputy Chair of the Commission of CRL, Dr. Petu, and then also the Deputy Chairperson, now the Acting Chairperson of the Human Rights Commission in South Africa. We could not have been embarked on this thing, on this hearing and investigation, without the support of the Commission of the South African Human Rights Commission of South African Human Rights Commission. And I thank Dr. Musoma and his team for rapid response by getting into it from very day one. But I must say that if it was not for Professor Majola, the then chairperson of the Human Rights Commission, Commissioner Makwetla, Commissioner Sibanyone, Commissioner Malatsi, and of course with Commissioner Tuli, and of course Commissioner Deputy Chair, that felt that even prior to the days of it happening, in fact on the Sunday when it started, we were in a meeting with the provincial manager of KZN, Lloyd Lotz, who's now at the Department of Justice, and we were joined in that meeting by Boang Jones, who was the PM of Gauteng, because we're beginning to see, while we're talking about KZN in that meeting, we saw things happening in Gauteng, and so we must be mindful that things happen in 2 or more provinces. And therefore, I'd like to say thank you to Professor Majola for his leadership, and at the time when he took us through how we need to handle this very, very difficult situation. At that stage, we could not see the immense and deep problems that we're facing in this country. But he took the leadership, and through the commissioners then, that we established a hearing to investigate not only what happened, but also what's behind and the systemic, in line with our threefold mandate, which is to promote, protect, and monitor human rights in the Republic of South Africa. And we felt that in the areas where it happened, some in a minor way, whether it's Mpumalanga, or Northwest or wherever, but in some in a minor way, but particularly within the two provinces, Gauteng and KZN. Hence, we called it a national hearing so we can focus on the issues that face our people. There was a good team led by Boang Jones. Lloyd Lotz was then the PM of KZN Human Rights Commission, and of course taken over by, fondly known by the provincial manager called PP, and a team, and Andrea in particular, who assisted in the back room with Claire from head office, and then also Laura Jane and Ranso, and Laura Jane and Martina being the last standing with Claire, the last standing custodians of the institutional memory of the hearing. And of course, you know, we must say thank you also to Sibo and Nobs and Paul, who in the three offices worked very hard together to pull things together in a very difficult moment. And may I then just also say thank you to the chairperson of the hearing at that stage, which was Commissioner Andre Gaum, and then fellow commissioners, Commissioner Tuli. It was a very difficult time for us. As the commission, we had to look at the implications of all of this. And that's why this took so long, because we could not rush into this hearing. We had to consider from victims to perpetrators to conditions to systemic nature of problems in our country. And we could not investigate who's behind this. That belonged to the security sector, in other words, law enforcement sector, that needed to do that. But we had to look at what affected people's rights in many forms. And we've seen it, and we've met with many victims and people across the KZN and across the Gauteng province. You know, and we have visited post the unrest. We visited a number of towns in KZN, and we listened to people's stories and wanted to hear from them, both the victims, but also those people who suffered because of the looting, but also those who died, because it's those people who died and whose bodies were discovered later on. So I had to meet with the family. We called people together from the NPA to SABC to all of that, from academics all over, to come, and including the president appeared before us, and others appeared before us, ministers appeared before us. There were some contradictions and so on. But our task was only to look at how best we can bring some recommendations that first of all, create a society in which we will be able to respect each other, and also to look at each other as South Africans. We also spoke about a number of issues, the spiritual repatriation. But the one thing also that came out very strongly is when we saw this functionality of society and what has happened, we were then saying, we need to have another program outside the hearing. The hearing will unearth how best we can address this from happening again, and redress in the form of whatever is going to happen in our recommendations in terms of we saying to government and government departments what they need to do. But the one that we looked at very carefully, led now by our deputy chair, was the issue about Shine, and that's about social cohesion. How do we bring different communities together, and how can we avoid this historical and systemic nature of disengagement, and how we bring everybody together? We've heard a number of stories, some very deep. We saw people coming with their wounds, and some of those wounds are still there. We've listened to people calling us, from families calling us for those who are in prison, and we had to listen to them. We listened to SABC, NPA, academics, civil society. We listened to the victims. We also went back to some of those communities, because some of those communities today are still suffering of socioeconomic rights. And therefore, our task as this commission, through this hearing and through our recommendations, we'd like to see, that this thing must never happen again in our country. But secondly, that our recommendations be taken seriously by those who can make a difference for the victims and for the community of all of those communities across KZN and Gauteng, where these things happened. Unprecedented. It took us some time. We did not want to rush. Yes, sometimes there were budget constraints, but all of it, we had to do what we have to do. And this is the Commission saying that we take our time, so in the end, we arrive at what is implementable in this country through our recommendations, which will be read out to you in due course. So thank you so much, colleagues. And as I said, the one thing is the issue that we have a two-strong approach, the hearing and the program of SHINE. And I hope that our Deputy Chair, the Acting Chair, will talk about it in a conclusion later today. Thank you so much, Program Director. My apologies. I have to run. My meeting starts now within the next 10 minutes. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, Commissioner Nissen, and thanks for making time for us, even though you are pressed for time for another meeting in Geneva. Ladies and gentlemen, as we stipulated in the beginning, we are going to be listening to delivery of two reports by two different Chapter 9 institutions, the CRL Rights Commission and the Human Rights Commission. So now we are moving to the item number 4, where the CRL Rights Commission, which is also one of the Chapter 9 institutions, is going to deliver its own report, findings and recommendations. That job will be done by the Chairperson of the CRL Rights Commission, Professor David Luka Mosoma. Over to you, Prof.
Thank you. Just for maintenance, is there any problem if he presents from there, from the people who are streaming?
Maybe they won't see, be able to see me or the others.
Must they come here?
Yeah. It's much better to...
Sorry? Oh, you will be captured from there, Chair. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much, Program Director, for the opportunity for me to present the report on behalf of the CRL Rights Commission. I want to acknowledge my colleague, Reverend Nissen in Geneva. Next to me, Ms. Ntuli, who are also doing the same work with me. The protocol have been given, and now I observe them. All those that have been acknowledged, I too acknowledge them. The CRL Rights Commission noted with grave concern about the unprecedented unrest that engulfed Phoenix and the surrounding areas, with the resultant injuries, destruction of properties, and of course, a loss of human life. For that, the CRL Rights Commission expresses its heartfelt condolences to all the affected families. I need to situate our report in the context of the CRL mandate. The Commission derives its mandate from the Constitution in terms of Section 185(1) and the CRL Rights Act number 19 of 2002. Second, the Section 185(1) of the Constitution and Section 4 of the CRL Rights Commission Act list objects of the Commission as follows. Why do we exist for? And it is important to understand the objects so that the report, as I read it or share with you, you must always visualize the context within which this commission operates. One, to promote respect for the rights of cultural, religious, and linguistic communities. To promote and develop peace, friendship, humanity, tolerance, and national unity among cultural, religious, and linguistic communities on the basis of equality, non-discrimination, and free association. That's the context of building a nation from the scratch. To foster mutual respect among cultural, religious, and linguistic communities. And to promote the right of communities to develop their own historically diminished heritage. To recommend the establishment or recognition of community councils in South Africa. Further, Section 5(1)(e) of the Act lists one of the powers of the Commission. Namely, the Commission has the power to monitor, investigate, research any issue concerning the rights of cultural, religious, and linguistic community. So what happened in Phoenix and surrounding areas falls squarely in the mandate of the Commission. Why did we investigate? The rationale for the investigative hearings. The rationale for the investigative hearings was to give effect, to give meaning, to give life to the CRL Rights Commission's powers of protecting, promoting the rights of cultural, religious, and linguistic communities where they seem to have been violated. For that reason, we had to investigate the causes of events that led to the unrest, facilitate the resolution of conflict between the two communities or communities around Phoenix and the surrounding areas, identifying programs and activities that will foster and promote peace, friendship, humanity, tolerance, and social cohesion, culminating in the communities living together in peace. Who did we meet in our investigative processes? The CRL met the following stakeholders: community leaders from Phoenix, Inanda, Amaoti, Kwamashu, Verulem, Bambai, and Zwelitsha. Ndlunkulu Wasematheni, former deputy chairperson of KZN, Provincial House of Traditional Leaders. Umtwana Wakamazi, Monyamanzi, and some Indunas, members of interfaith organizations, social organizations, members of Peace Committee, members of Phoenix Community Policing Forum, youth structures, women organizations, some families of the deceased, some victims of the violent attacks, and some members of the communities in Phoenix and surrounding areas. What did we find in interacting with the stakeholders I have tabulated above? First, we found that there existed adversarial relationship between members of the African communities and Indian communities. Why? The mistrust and suspicion of the Africans by the Indians allegedly led to the killings of Africans by Indians, as cited by some of the members of the community. And this, in their view, has a historical genesis or historical origin in 1949 events. Further, it was cited that the causes of unrest were criminality, organized crime, and inequality that exists in these communities. These mistrusts and suspicion make it difficult for the Phoenix and the surrounding communities to coexist and foster the values of friendship, peace, and humanity, tolerance based on equality, non-discrimination, and free association. As a result, the 2021 unrest found a ready fertile ground to spread mistrust and suspicion among the communities. Second, racism. The CRL found that racism is prevalent in Phoenix and surrounding areas and has a negative impact on the lives of African people in terms of economy, public service, and participation. An inherent systemic prejudice exists, and it continues to marginalize the African people. This provides a collective power of one group against the other. Racism is allegedly pervasive or pervasively present in Phoenix and surrounding areas, and it has been brought to the attention of the CRL Rights Commission and how this it affects and how this particular prevalence affects the coexistence of these communities. Third, economic dominance of Indians in eThekwini. The CRL Rights Commission found that the economy, in terms of the hearings, the economy and dominance of that economy is in the hands of Indians, especially when it comes in their view, control, ownership, and management of the economy is still in the hands of one group. As exemplified by some women from Amaoti who said, "We have nothing. Our lives are in Phoenix, where they have ATMs, garages, supermarkets, clinics, schools, jobs, hospitals, and many other facilities." The CRL Rights Commission found that as a result of the lack of access to economic facility and participation, many cross the bridge daily to go to Phoenix for everything they need. Spatial planning. Spatial planning, though important this may be, the CRL found that the issue is not inherently spatial planning, but it is about the ability and the willingness to share the limited space that exists in order to foster tolerance and the integration of communities. Because sharing the space would tantamount to maximization of collective benefit. The CRL Commission found that there is a lack of integration to promote diversity and social cohesion, and therefore CRL Rights Commission encourages integrative spatial planning as a norm given this particular circumstance. Schools. CRL Rights Commission found that many peoples migrate from Amaoti to Phoenix for schooling daily, and we had the privilege to be there in the afternoon. And so the exodus of young men, of school children, moving back home to Emaoti, like ants as it were, in big, what you call, groups, getting into Emaoti from Phoenix. Second, the staffing model for these schools is skewed in favor of members from the Indian community, and thus lacking a proper community representation in terms of the provision of education. The school staffing model dehumanizes African teachers and portrays them as not good for anything else, but only to teach as a Zulu. We found that the appointments of teachers were not consistent with skillful or skills possessed by the individuals in order to bring in the cohorts, as it were, of Africans into schooling system. Language barrier at the Phoenix police station. CRL Rights found, or was informed, of the alleged domination of Indian community in police stations, of which most do not speak isiZulu. As a result, many people from African communities found it difficult to report majority of incidents to the police due to lack of, due to language barrier. I think it existed and demonstrated during the time of the incidents of 2021. We found that language barrier is against the spirit of equitable usage of all languages, official languages of the country. Now, what do we recommend? First, we start with the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture. The CRL Rights Commission recommends the strengthening of social cohesion activities through programs of cultural activities and sports to foster tolerance and coexistence. We recommend alternative conflict resolution programs to attend these conflicts before they explode. In other words, the skills of conflict resolution must be germane to our existence if we want to build a cohesive society, all of us. We recommend that inter-sport activities like soccer, swimming, netball, etc. be held frequently as a way of encouraging interaction between the communities around. Two, what we recommend about racism, as I've raised initially. We recommend programs that address racism mindset change, which affirms the humanity of others, irrespective of race, gender, language, must be introduced in schools and communities. Of course, generally, the whole South Africa. Anyone who is found to be a racist must be charged and be made to serve his or her sentence in the prejudicial community in order to combat racism in all its forms. And this must be everybody's business. KwaZulu Department of Education and Department of Economic Development, Tourism and Environment Affairs. What do we recommend? We recommend that deliberate investments to uplift the lives of African communities in rural and urban areas must be promoted, must be the first priority through legislation and ongoing programs of action, which shall assist the communities to develop economically and improve their socio-economic conditions. This, we believe, shall help to promote social cohesion, inclusivity, and The CRL also recommend, which is important now in terms of how to remember those who have died in 2021. Therefore, the CRL Rights Commission recommends that government should build a statue in remembrance of people who lost their lives during the 2021 unrest. Department of Education. The KZN Department of Education must introduce policies which address the fact that the qualified African educators, normally Indian-only schools, are not just there to teach isiZulu only, but should equally be interviewed and recommended to teach mainstream subjects and be promoted as heads of other subjects as well. Both the national and provincial departments of education should develop programs which will instill the values of Ubuntu and cultural diversity in all our schools in the whole country. KZN Provincial Police. The CRL recommends that the South African Police Service should also address the issue of language barrier at their different police stations. There should be a constant geographical rotation of police personnel from one area to another, as posting police personnel in one area for a long time could make them complacent. Cleansing ceremony. In the African culture, cleansing is a conflagration of deaths to appease, acknowledge, and recognize those who have gone before. Therefore, cleansing and healing is the restoration of the relations between the living and the dead. For this reason, we recommend a collective cleansing encompassing multicultural, multi-religious communities, and the CRL shall be the facilitator for this process. I thank you.
Before I begin, we have our interpreter that has arrived, Mr. who is doing interpretation for us in Zulu. So if you can please invite, she's going to come to the front so we can start with the interpretation. Thank you. Chairperson of the CRL Commission, acting Chairperson of the South African Human Rights Commission, and Deputy Chairperson of the CRL Commission, Commissioners of the South African Human Rights Commission and the CRL Commission, respectively, National Commissioner of the Police and his esteemed representatives from his office, the KZN Deputy or Acting Provincial Commissioner of the SAHRC, respective CEOs of the South African Human Rights Commission and the CRL Commission, fellow members of the deceased and representatives and members of the respective communities, members of staff of the South African Human Rights Commission and the CRL Commission, representatives of the media, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. My name is Crystal Pillay. I am the COO of the Human Rights Commission, and I will now be directing the remainder of the program. The remainder of the program deals mainly with presentations of the findings, the recommendations of the report of the Human Rights Commission, which are contained in the report entitled July's People, the National Investigative Hearing Report into the July 2021 unrest in Gauteng and KZN. Commissioner Tuli, who was also a member of the hearing panel, will now present the summary, findings, and recommendations of this report.
Fellow South Africans, very welcome visitors to our country. Good morning to all of you. We have titled our report July's People very intentionally. In 1981, Nadine Gordimer published July's People, an astoundingly prognostic tale of a South Africa undergoing a liberation war and revolution after 30 years of the rule of the apartheid government. During the uprising, anarchy envelops the nation. Many of those who had benefited from this racialized system flee the country. But when airports are bombed during the riots, travel outside of the country ceases. July's People narrates the confrontation between the slaves, a middle-class liberal white family, and the rootedness of racialized socialization. Having lost all of their material belongings to the war and under the threat of revolutionary violence in the cities and the suburbs, they take refuge at the rural village of their African helper, Mr. July. Fellow South Africans, in the interest of those who are unable to hear me, I'm going to request assistance with the Zulu translator. My good brother here is not translating what I'm saying.
And keep them 17. But if she can keep it short, she's too long. Poor guy. C'est possible to make it. It was very difficult to translate the thing. What was it? It's a confidence.
Once servant, Mr. July dramatically transforms into savior and host. As powers and roles are forced to change, the interpersonal relationships expose the difficulties of transitioning out of an old order towards an imagined new society. What ensues as the political, social, and interpersonal relationships are reconfigured is a remarkable interrogation of the complex interdependencies, tensions and conflicts that permeate across racial, cultural, and class differences. The themes invoked by Godimal's July's People of 1981 starkly resemble those arising out of democratic South Africa's People of July 2021. At the time of the occurrence of the July 2021 unrest, the material and social lives of South Africans were characterized by patterns that largely resembled their colonial and apartheid origins. South Africa not only has some of the highest income inequalities globally, but the people who fill either ends of the inequality spectrums largely belong to the same subjective categories of privilege or underprivilege which they occupied in July 1981. The 2021 July unrest, which unfolded primarily in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng provinces, occurred amidst a tense social, economic, and political period in South Africa. At the time, the country and the world were still struggling to come to terms with the cost of the COVID-19 pandemic. The country was on adjusted alert level 4 from 28 June to 25 July 2021. In the period immediately prior to the declaration of the pandemic, the International Monetary Fund had described South Africa as an extremely unequal society with high and rising unemployment. By June 2021, South Africa had moved from a 29% unemployment rate to a recorded all-time high of 34.4%. Amidst the socio-economic downturn, the nation was also facing the unprecedented event of the possible incarceration of a former head of state. On 29 June 2021, the Constitutional Court found former President Jacob Zuma guilty of the crime of contempt of court for failing to comply with its previous order in the matter of Secretary of the Judicial Commission of Inquiry into allegations of state capture, corruption and fraud in the public sector, including organs of state versus Zuma. President Zuma was sentenced to 15 months imprisonment. From the day of the court ruling and the next day, on the 30th of June 2021, until his incarceration on the 7th of July 2021, former President Jacob Zuma's supporters gathered outside of his home in England. Most supporters were reportedly wearing either the regalia of the African National Congress, army fatigues representing Umkhonto weSizwe, or the full regalia of Amabutho Amazulu. War cries and songs reverberated. Some brandished weapons, and the sound of live ammunition featured prominently in media reports. In the days that followed President Jacob Zuma's imprisonment, between 8 and 19 July 2021, acts of protest, violence, and looting spread across KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng provinces. Access to vital services such as food, medicine, medical care, security, and basic education, as well as important national and international supply chains, were disrupted. It was reported that 40,000 businesses and 50,000 informal traders were affected. with 150,000 jobs put at risk. The financial damage of the unrest was estimated at 50 billion South African rands, and approximately 353 lives were lost. In the immediate aftermath of the unrest, the South African Human Rights Commission held a public imbizo. The imbizo sought to create a platform for a collective reflection and reckoning with the unprecedented events. At the imbizo, members of the public requested the Commission to investigate certain aspects of the unrest with a view to preventing such a recurrence in the future and in the interest of victims. This catalyzed the national hearing, which was held from 15 November 2021 to 21 June 2022 in Durban and Johannesburg. By the end of the national hearing, the hearing panel had 54 oral testimonies and received more than 120 written submissions. As per the terms of reference, the Commission, represented by the hearing panel and the evidence team, inquired into the following. The first was the social, economic, spatial, and political factors prevalent in the various affected areas, and the extent to which these played a role in the unrest. That was the first issue. The second issue was the causes of the alleged racially motivated attacks and killings throughout our country. The third were the causes of the apparent lapses in law enforcement by state security agencies, particularly the South African Police Service, and the role of private security companies in the unrest. The last one was the causes of the July unrest, with a particular focus on Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal. Now I move to a summary of the report, including our findings and our recommendations. With regards to issue 1, the social, economic, spatial, and political factors prevalent in the various affected areas and the extent to which these played a role in the July unrest, the Commission makes the following findings. The evidence presented to the Commission shows that the acts which occurred during the unrest were indeed orchestrated. The blocking of the N3 and the N2, the calculated destruction of factories and warehouses, the organized disconnection of security and fire alarm systems, the attack on government communication facilities at the Durban port, and the bombing and removal of ATMs, together cannot be viewed as mutually distinct. These events point to a significant investment in the execution of the July unrest. The evidence further points to two types of actors in and during the July unrest. The primary actors, who were well-resourced, led and executed the widespread destruction of property and perpetrated arson attacks. They then, in turn, mobilized the secondary actors, who participated in acts of theft at malls and other business premises. The timing of the events of the July unrest coincided with the incarceration of former President Jacob Zuma. This caused an intertwining that blurred the lines between where one ended and where the other started. This intersection of events has led many to conclude that the two are indeed related. However, The Commission finds that while the timing of the events of the July unrest coincided with the incarceration of former President Jacob Zuma, it could not find evidence to link the two events. It is probable that the unrest was undertaken to destabilize the South African economy. However, it will be ultimately within the purview of the South African Police Service and the National Prosecutions Authority to make a conclusive finding regarding the orchestration of the July unrest. The government's shortcomings in effectively sharing intelligence products and information played a significant role in the escalation of the July unrest. This refers to the inability to gather timely and accurate information about potential threats and to share it amongst relevant security agencies. The South African Police Service was ill-prepared to deal with the orchestrated attacks. This might include insufficient training, equipment, or resources to effectively respond to the situation. The lack of appropriate action in response to the initial signs of the unrest led to criminal activities such as theft, arson, and malicious damage to properties. The failure to promptly address and counter digital orchestration and instigation through social media and other online platforms allowed the unrest to grow. This suggests that online communication and coordination played a role in fueling the violence. The working relationship between the Minister of Police and the National Commissioner of Police had a negative impact on the collection and sharing of intelligence information, and thereby employing the response of the South African Police Service effectively. With regards to the socio-economic factors in the unrest, the socio-economic conditions of the majority of South Africans were a major factor in the spread, extent, and scale of the July unrest. However, this was not the cause of the unrest. The socio-economic conditions and the disillusionment with government in its inability to provide better living conditions allowed the secondary actors to spread their exclusion and frustration through participation in the July unrest. With regards to the use of social media platforms, the Commission finds that through the creation and dissemination of inflammatory content, social media amplified the grievances, stoked fear and anger, and mobilized individuals towards disruptive actions. Social media and the nature of moving towards the fourth industrial revolution calls upon the government to halt any traditional ways of thinking and to operationalize the gathering of intelligence information from social media platforms. It was clear from the evidence obtained that mechanisms to gather information to counter the weaponization of these platforms are available. However, the responsible entities did not take steps to improve their skills, neither did they have the capacity to do so at that time. As set out above, the Commission has found that the state did not have the capability or the mechanisms to adequately address and combat mis- and disinformation, and if they had it, they did not employ it effectively. Furthermore, digital media monitoring experts determined that no singular cause could be established from the data generated through online monitoring. The Commission further finds a concerning lack of awareness amongst the public regarding their online duties and responsibilities in practicing responsible communication on social media platforms. This lack of awareness clearly had severe consequences, leading to various offenses such as incitement, hate speech, and harassment being committed during the unrest. The Commission therefore finds that it is essential to recognize that combating disinformation is not only about safeguarding the right to access accurate information, but also about preserving the integrity of democratic systems, protecting national security interests, and ensuring the well-being of all citizens. A comprehensive approach that combines technological solutions, media literacy, and collaboration amongst government, tech companies, and civil society is vital to effectively counter disinformation as both a human rights and national security threat. I now move to our recommendations with regards to issue 1. With respect to the social, economic, spatial, and political factors prevalent in the various affected areas and the extent to which these played a role in the July unrest, the Commission makes the following findings. With regards to the political factors that played a role in the unrest, both SSA and crime intelligence are to engage and deepen relationships with different sectors of society to enhance the quality of intelligence gathering and its management. Mechanisms and measures should be put in place to address the rapid and timely flow of information in order to promote effective and efficient responses to national security threats. The President must take steps to ensure that the Commission is provided with a report on how such mechanisms and measures are being developed. With regards to the socio-economic factors, the government and the private sector have an urgent responsibility to address the socio-economic inequalities and the inequalities of access to the economy, as mentioned by the Chair of the CRL Rights Commission, which are differentiated along racial lines in patterns that are reflective of a racialized economy. The state must take steps to ensure socio-economic transformation of the racial dynamics of the South African economy. Despite the realization of socio-economic rights being the responsibility of government, the Commission is including the private sector in its recommendations not only because of its historical and current importance in the nation-building project, but that the sector remains central to the National Economy Recovery Plan. There is a need for all South Africans to have a share in the economy and for common ownership of the country's vast natural and other resources. The unrest has demonstrated to all of us the need to create a legitimate, inclusive economy. The state must invest in monitoring and evaluation tools and resources to record and measure the impact upon implementing their socio-economic action steps as outlined above. The Commission acknowledges the work done by the Gauteng provincial government in this regard. With regards to the use of social media platforms, the Commission recommends that the Minister of Communications, in collaboration with the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies and the public broadcaster, must take proactive measures to promote public understanding of the legislative framework that safeguards the abuse and misuse of information and disinformation. Further to this, the Commission recommends that its social media charter be used as an advocacy tool in this regard. The Commission recommends that in the development and implementation of relevant laws regarding disinformation and misinformation, the state should ensure that this is done through a balanced approach to safeguard against harm and the risk of harm to society. While recognizing the need to combat the spread of violence through online mediums, it is essential to avoid the undue limitation of the right to freedom of expression. The Commission further recommends that the President considers measures to curb misinformation and disinformation aimed at causing harm and include, during such consideration, consulting representatives from the Commission to deliberate on an appropriate way forward to address challenges related thereto. To effectively address online threats such as incitement to commit acts of violence, harassment, hate speech, and the activities of organized criminal syndicates, the Commission recommends that the state should allocate resources to establish an expert-level panel. This panel should be composed of professionals with relevant expertise who can provide guidance, draft directives, and advise on identifying and mitigating online threats. I now move to the second issue, being the causes of the alleged racially motivated attacks and killings in the country. In respect of the causes of the alleged racially motivated attacks and killings in the country, the Commission makes the following findings. Whereas the July unrest initially and mainly was branded and characterized by news reports of protests that were supporting former President Jacob Zuma, and their subsequent development into and intertwining with the mass anarchy that ensued, a tone of racialized violence began to emerge amidst this narrative. The July unrest created a climate of fear and a climate of tension, prompting many people of all races to take to the streets in an effort to protect their homes and their neighborhoods, particularly in the absence of visible policing. Amidst this climate, the generalizing notion of swart khafar, which is the perceived threat of black individuals, began to emerge or to re-emerge from its dormant places. This contributed to a generalized fear and suspicion of the intentions of black African nations instituted in KwaZulu-Natal regarding the unrest may be due to challenges in identifying perpetrators or awaiting the outcome of criminal trials. A collaborative approach should be initiated between the Commission, government departments, sociologists, and psychologists to devise and test proposals to tackle systemic racism and to cultivate a united national identity. This identity should aim to explore innovative approaches to address racism and to prevent future racial violence as a response to the tragic killings of black African individuals that occurred during the July unrest. I now move to issue 3. The causes of the apparent lapses in law enforcement by intelligence agencies, particularly the South African Police Service, and the role of private security companies in the unrest. the Commission makes the following findings. The South African Police Service failed to detect the planning and execution of the unrest, which falls within its mandate. A combination of factors appeared to have caused these shortcomings. Evidence tabled before the panel points to the under-resourcing and the consequent lack of capacity within crime intelligence. Evidently, there has also been a breakdown in coherent communication within the South African Police Service between crime intelligence, the National Commissioner of Police, relevant operational divisions, and the Minister of Police. The state intelligence apparatus and approach to the unrest have self-evidently proven to be ineffective. Excessive secrecy, insufficient resources, and a lack of technological capability appear to have been the cause of the failure to detect and respond effectively to the planned unrest, as well as contribute effectively to stabilization efforts. The evidence points to a need for urgent and comprehensive improvement within the South African Police Service and the crime intelligence structures in order to address systemic failures and ensure accountability, to restore public trust and confidence, and to prevent future instances which are similar to the July unrest. With regards to inadequate preparedness and responsiveness by the National Security Council, the National Security Council, as envisaged in Section 198 and Section 199 of the South African Constitution, would require the prioritization and effective coordination of the national security apparatus through the National Security Council. The President, in his testimony, reflected that not focusing on this National Security Council was, and I open quote, a great mistake on our part, but at the same time, without putting it forward as an excuse, we were called upon to focus more on the pandemic. I close quote. While the Commission acknowledges that the pandemic demanded immediate attention and resources, it could not have come at the expense of national security. The government had to strike a delicate balance between addressing public health concerns on the one hand and upholding the fundamental principles of human rights on the other hand. Even in times of external challenges, the protection and respect of human rights should have been maintained. By ensuring that the National Security Council responded to its proclaimed mandate, the government could have effectively responded to the pandemic while safeguarding the rights and liberties of its citizens. The Commission therefore finds that despite the challenges caused by the pandemic, the President should have taken steps to ensure that the National Security Council was convened, that the national security was prioritized, and an effective and transparent national security strategy was in place. With regards to insufficient security expertise and resource management, the state's response to the July unrest in the provinces of KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng was hindered by poor communication, coordination, planning, and high-level management. There was a delayed response and inadequate resource management, leading to an ineffective response to the crisis. Early warning signs were disregarded, and intelligence gathering and sharing were ineffective. There was a total breakdown in law and order in the affected areas for at least 5 full days. The President, as the head of the executive, Ministers for Intelligence, Police Services, and the Directors General, committed to ensuring a timeless and effectively coordinated response to the unfolding crisis, and omitted to prevent the breakdown in law and order in the affected areas. With regards to the failure of joint security, intelligence, and operations bodies, the National Joint Operational and Intelligence Structure, also known as NAPJOINTS, failed to promptly respond to the security risks, information, and early warning mechanisms provided by NICOC in this lead to the escalation of the violence. With regards to the absence of community engagement in the case of reporting and access to justice, during the investigation, it became apparent that the victims of violence were not being adequately engaged with the South African Police Service, the National Prosecutions Authority, nor kept informed of their rights and the processes of the criminal justice system. With regards to the lack of accountability and impunity within justice institutions in general, despite probative evidence suggesting the involvement of former and current members of the security and law enforcement sectors in criminal activities during the unrest, neither the National Prosecutions Authority nor the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development could confirm any ongoing investigations or prosecutions against such individuals. The perceived lack of action, disciplinary measures, or prosecutions against such persons over the past 2 years are of serious concern. With regards to SAHRC findings as it pertains to poor regulation and abuse of power, evidence obtained during the investigation makes it apparent that many private security companies fail to comply with regulations and operated without effective oversight. This is further apparent from the evidence of inadequate vetting of private security officers and the indiscriminate distribution of firearms to officers without firearm licenses. The PSCs thus largely operated during the unrest without proper and effective regulation. The PSAHRC has failed in its mandate to report and to address these contraventions of the law. The evidence indicates that the PSCs, or private security companies, operated with an unregulated and unchecked policing power, including irregularly acting as public order policing units without appropriate crowd management training, which training SAHRC admits to not providing despite the clear need, therefore. In crisis situations like the July Unrest, private security companies appear to have usurped the roles of the South African Police Services during the capacity limitations within the South African Police Service. This eroded public confidence in the South African Police Service. Furthermore, the private security companies became the de facto law enforcers who lacked the required training and expertise. While the Commission commends PCRA for taking action against the private security companies who were found to have violated the law during the July Unrest, it finds that it failed in general to fulfill its duty to regulate the private security sector, which resulted in the widespread violation of human rights during the July Unrest. PCRA's code of conduct does not sufficiently incorporate human rights values, such as community engagement and compensation for victims in cases of violations. With regards to government accountability, the Commission found that since the July Unrest, there have been several structural changes and shifts within the security cluster. In particular, the former Ministers of Defense and the State Security Agency and the DG of the State Security Agency, the National Commissioner of the South African Police Service, have respectively either resigned or been removed from cabinet and their positions. I now move to our recommendations. In respect to the causes of the apparent lapses in law enforcement by state security agencies, particularly the South African Police Service and the role of private security companies in the unrest, the Commission makes the following findings. The first, an absence of community engagement in case reporting and access to justice. The Commission recommends the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development, the NPA, the South African Police Service, and the National Treasury must make capacity available for regular communication with victims and families of victims. And understanding that the South African Police Service officials and the NPA are acting within the confines of the law may assist in the reduction of criticism of the South African Police Service and the NPA officials, as well as reduce vigilante justice. With regards to a comprehensive database of deaths, the Commission recommends that the South African Police Service must compile a full and comprehensive report on all unrest-related deaths and submit same to the South African Human Rights Commission. A clear explanation of the circumstances under which these deaths would have occurred must be included. The Commission recommends that the South African Police Service examines the high number of deaths as a result of the police action during the unrest and implements measures to reduce the risk of such deaths in the future. The South African Police Service is required to provide the Commission with a report in this regard. Furthermore, the security sector, which includes the State Security Agency, the South African National Defence Force, and relevant stakeholders, must urgently develop a national security strategy and provide an assurance to the Commission and the public that this plan has been developed and must take steps to implement it. The plan should aim to achieve, inter alia, the following. 1. To strengthen cooperative governance within the security sector and promote government preparedness by establishing a clear and comprehensive national security strategy. 2. strengthen intergovernmental coordination between national, provincial, and local authorities for a comprehensive and cohesive response to crises. 3. Establish a multi-stakeholder task force for ongoing dialogue, collaboration, and monitoring of progress in addressing underlying causes of the unrest. And lastly, establish a specialized national disaster and crisis management unit within the South African National Defence Force structures with specific training in early disaster management relief. We further recommend that the Joint Standing Committee on Intelligence oversees the enhancement of the regular and consistent delivery of quality, safety, security, and emergency services to the public while combating information disorder. The Commission recommends that the Office of the President determines a framework for the escalation protocols within the Presidency to address and respond to information provided by the anonymous witnesses and members of the public with prima facie evidence and interests of the national security in line with the precepts of Section 198 of the Constitution. The Joint Standing Committee on Intelligence and the Inspector General of Intelligence, the IGI, should take accountability for oversight of both the State Security Agency and the Division of Crime Intelligence, and the following proposed improvements. Inter alia, regularly vetting security access and intelligence, the development of a centralized data security system, which both the SSA as well as the South African Police Service can share, could potentially offer a self-correcting solution to the breakdown in intelligence information sharing. The Commission further recommends that the Presidency, Cabinet, and respective ministers and departments which fall within the JCPS cluster ensure that community policing forums become more effective in order to build trust within the communities, and in doing so, take note of the following. 1. Prioritize reform and capacitation of the South African Police Service to address deficiencies in personnel, training, and public order policing. To also refer to the Africa report and the high-level panel report, which intimate the risks of politicization of police and security functions. Meaningful community engagements with community policing forums and a definitive consultative process with the provincial and national commissioner could potentially depoliticize the complex bureaucratic arrangements which appear to create operational lag times with devastating consequences. The community policing forums reports should be regularly reviewed, and allegations of community policing forums being infiltrated by criminal elements should be taken seriously by the South African Police Service. Integration of neighborhood watches and community policing forums should be facilitated by local South African Police Service precincts as it appears that neighborhood watches operate parallel and at times collaborate with local community policing forums, metro units, and other law enforcement agencies. The public is therefore an invaluable resource and stakeholder for the South African Police Service to invest in. Fostering procedural justice, the capacity and ability of the South African Police Service to carry out its function in a procedural, correct manner without fear or favor, delivering intelligence on time, informing communities of growing instability, employing rights-sensitive methods or public order policing methods, effecting arrests within the minimum force method, and rooting out institutional corruption are all areas where public confidence could be restored through proper procedural mechanisms. Considering the consistent use by the South African Police Service of rubber bullets in crowd management, and introduce a clear national instruction regulating the use of rubber bullets by South African Police Services members, and routinely report on the use of rubber bullets, including providing details of the use of rubber bullets by each unit involved in their use. The Commission further recommends that the President must take steps to ensure regular meetings of the National Security Council, ensuring it effectively and efficiently meets its mandate in terms of the Presidential Proclamation number 13 of 2020, and that a public indication is given of the dates of each of these meetings once they have taken place. Further, and with regards to transparent sharing of judicial proceedings, the Department of Justice and the Office of the National Director of Public Prosecutions must engage directly with affected communities and provide transparent and comprehensive accounts of prosecutions and inquests conducted during the July Unrest. The South African Police Service must also be present at these engagements and give an account of any pending investigations. These engagements should be convened at least twice a year until the investigations, inquests, and prosecutions have been finalized. This includes the sharing of post-unrest reports on the NDPP's assessments of access to justice in Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal areas while ensuring a transformative and restorative justice approach. The information shared should strike a balance between the rights of the accused as well as the rights of the victims. Improving cyber crime prosecutions. The Commission recommends that the NDPP outlines the National Prosecution Authority's strategic response to cybercrime, especially the crime of incitement to commit violence. The evidence furnished by law enforcement, the national security sector, the media, and security experts has highlighted the rapidly developing threat of social media mobilized violence. The Commission notes that the several prosecutions of incitement to public violence resulted in the withdrawal of cases due to technical challenges presented by the complex nature of MLA proceedings. The Commission encourages the National Prosecutions Authority to strengthen the MLA practices between South Africa and other countries within the global community to safeguard the right to safety and security and to ensure successful prosecution of cybercrime. With regards to the private security sector, implementation of internal human rights policy for private security officers should be implemented within the following considerations in compiling a regulatory framework. Firstly, that all law enforcement and security sectors establish and enforce an internal human rights approach during the training of private security officers. Secondly, this policy should ensure that private security officers understand their roles exclusively under the law and are strictly prohibited from assuming the responsibilities of the South African Police Service during the unrest and during protest actions. Thirdly, in instances of the unrest where the South African Police Service lacks the capacity with crowd management and where it may require the support and the assistance of private security officers, this must be done with the following proviso. The consent from the National Commissioner of Police is obtained and their assistance is supervised by the South African Police Service. The training of private security officers must align with constitutional values, particularly in relation to the regulation of excessive use of force. Reports of disciplinary processes involving private security officers relating to the unrest must be disclosed to the public. Promoting transparency and accountability, with consideration being made to the provisions of the POPIA and other relevant statutory provisions. Standardize the use of less lethal weapons in crowd management. The Commission recommends that the Minister of Police, through written direction to the National Commissioner or by regulation, must impose a standard regarding the use of less lethal weapons in crowd management. This standard should align with international policing and crowd management standards, with a strong emphasis on minimizing the risk of human rights violations and excessive use of force. Training programs should be updated to ensure that the South African Police Service officers are adequately trained in the proper use of less lethal weapons, emphasizing the de-escalation techniques and the proportional use of force. With regards to the limited personnel strength in the public order policing units, the Commission recommends that the South African Police Service must provide the report to the Commission on steps taken to address, inter alia, the capacity constraints, financial constraints, recruitment, as well as training. The South African Police Service must ensure regular engagements, such as national symposiums, should be organized to promote solutions-based outcomes and to foster professionalism and constructive dialogue to enhance the protection of human rights during protests. And lastly, under issue 3, it is essential that the South African Police Service and the public order police must prioritize de-escalation techniques, proportional use of force, and the safeguarding of human rights while effectively managing crowds and maintaining public order. I now move to the last issue, which is issue 4, the causes of the July unrest, with a particular focus on Gauteng and KwaZulu-Natal. The July unrest was a violent culmination of deep-rooted political and social challenges that the country has been grappling with for a number of years. The unrest was largely attributed to typologies of organization and orchestration of public discord, crime, and protest. In a concluding section of this report, or in this concluding section of this report, the Commission addresses this issue 4, encapsulating the causes of the unrest as well as incorporating issues 1, issue 2, as well as issue 3. The evidence presented before the Commission indicated that the acts, as mentioned before, that occurred during the unrest were indeed well orchestrated, including the blocking of the N3 and the N2, the destruction of factories and warehouses, the attacks on government communication facilities, and the bombing and thefts of ATMs. These events were interconnected and required significant resources. There were 2 types of actors, I repeat, who were identified during the unrest. The primary actors who led and executed widespread destruction, and the secondary actors who participated in the mass theft. The timing of the events coincided with the incarceration of the former President Jacob Zuma, leading to a perception that these 2 events might be related. However, the intelligence reports revealed a fragile social fabric with security threats detected from as early as December 2020, leading up to the unrest in July 2021. There were various alerts which were issued on threats to shut down regions, to demand the removal of President Ramaphosa, to target national highways, and protests against foreign nationals and drug dealers. The roles, the resources, and opportunities of the groups posing threats were critical in understanding the narrative of the July unrest. Between December 2020 and July 2021, diverse actors and sectors with varying agendas were mobilizing against the security of the South African state. The Commission did not receive clear evidence identifying specific groups and individuals as primary actors. While the evidence pointed to high-level orchestration, the common purpose or intention behind the unrest remains unclear. The violence and destruction was symptomatic of unresolved systemic conditions, including post-COVID-19 economic recovery, high unemployment, lawlessness, discrimination, socio-economic divides, and issues within the security sector. The Commission concluded that organized groups and individuals opportunistically exploited these conditions to attempt to usurp the rule of law. In conclusion, and as observed by President Cyril Ramaphosa, I open quote, "For 1 week and 1 day in July, we stared into the heart of darkness. We watched in horror as parts of KwaZulu-Natal were engulfed in violence, looting, destruction, and death. We saw scenes of homes being ransacked and destroyed, and shops, businesses, and warehouses being looted and torched. and of people being beaten and humiliated. We felt uncertain. We felt fearful for our lives, our loved ones, and our country. We felt the greatest sense of betrayal, that there were some amongst us
My task is to address the question, what is its way forward? The investigation report, as you've just heard, contains the recommendations and findings of the South African Human Rights Commission. And following to its launch of the Commission's report, an electronic version of it will be sent to all relevant stakeholders, including government departments, who will then have 60 days to let the Commission know how they intend to give effect to these recommendations. An isiZulu version of the report is in preparation and will also be distributed. The full report will be made available on the Commission's website. The Commission has also established a working relationship with the Unrest Task Team concerned with monitoring court cases relating to the interpersonal violence that occurred during the unrest. The Commission obtains updated information on pending criminal cases still being processed through the criminal justice system and facilitates communication between the South African Police Services, the National Prosecuting Authority and the victims in respect of their cases relating to assault and to the families of deceased persons in cases of alleged murder. The last update we provided to community members was on the 2nd of December 2024, and the Commission will continue facilitating this role. The Human Rights Commission acknowledges that due to the nature of the attacks and the inability in some cases to identify alleged attackers, that some victims and their families may not be assisted through the criminal justice system. Also, at this stage, there is no state at whose doorstep the blame for vigilante racist attacks and murders can be laid. The Commission is unable to legally make a finding on intellectual and financial liability for victim compensation. Without making any express or specific undertaking in this regard, the Commission intends to continue to investigate ways in which redress within the limitations of the law and the Commission's powers can be secured. Ladies and gentlemen, fellow countrymen and women, the July Unrest was indeed a watershed moment for our country. For what seemed like an interminable time, in the words of our President, and I reflect, we felt uncertain, fearful for ourselves, for our loved ones, for our country. We felt the greatest sense of betrayal that there were some amongst us who would go so far as to plot to destroy this very country we spent the past 28 years to build. Close quotes. The President is of course correct that for 30 years we have busied ourselves with creating a country which has a constitution, many laws to govern us, a government, and various public institutions. These indeed are the constructs of state and country. What we have not succeeded in doing is to create a nation, a concept decidedly not based on the nuts and bolts of the state, but human ones, which lock us together in the knowledge that our past, our present, and our future are indeed tied together. A nation is founded on the understanding that we are each other's keepers. A nation standing together at times of crisis and threats, in the knowledge that we can rely on one another in compassion and in solidarity. This nationhood, based on human bonds and the values of consideration, compassion, respect, we have not fully achieved. There are glimpses of it from time to time, such as when we anguished together during the recent Rugby World Cup as our team beat the odds and crossed the line with a single point in their last 3 grueling matches. Or, as the ICJ delivered its judgment on our country's case this Friday past. These are glimpses of hope that we can forge a nation steeped in humanitarian ethos, and that working together we can achieve marvelous things. Yet there are terrible hardships and pain endured daily by our fellow compatriots and neighbors. Every day in our country we have people who ponder where their next meal will come from, and children who suffer malnutrition. On the other hand, there is also great excess and waste. Poverty is an indignity that gnaws at the human soul, and this indignity persists in our midst and on our watch. There is a question asked by a small charity based on the Cape Flats called Mustaqim Foundation, and it asks simply, if each of us helps our neighbor, then who will need help? The fact is, we bear the intergenerational scars of our past, when common humanity and dignity were denied to the majority of the country. Dispossession, exploitation, and exclusion were the hallmark of over 300 years of our history, where there was a hierarchy of the value of life itself, where violence was our repose. But these legacies remain lingering like cancer, threatening the whole of the body. This is evidenced by the breakdown of traditional families where single mothers and child-led households abound, where children prefer living on the streets rather than at home, where women who are the fount of society are demeaned in their own homes and by those who they trust, and where neighbors do not even greet each other. Employers who still pay exploitative wages to their workers, especially African women, many of whom work in our homes and help bring up our children. We spend on building ever higher walls to protect ourselves from the outside menace. The other, defined as the person who dresses differently, speaks differently, and has a different tone of skin. We are all guilty of not being enough to build bridges, to tighten the bonds of friendship amongst ourselves and create a happier, healthier nation. In such a country where the other is a menace, inferior, and deserving of shunning. This is a place where humanity and hope die. This is a place where despair and distrust flourish. Ubuntu teaches us that we cannot be safe if our neighbor is hungry, that we are not islands, but interdependent. The responsibility to build bridges in harmony amongst ourselves, in our homes, in our communities, is not a task we can outsource to any government, but a task to be vigorously pursued by the government. We understand our past and the divisions it created. What is the excuse that we will offer future generations when we are asked why these divisions persisted into our democracy? So the question is, what is the way forward, South Africa? How do we forge this nation that our beloved founder, President Nelson Mandela, described after he spent 27 years on Robben Island contemplating this very question? What is the way forward for South Africa? Since the July 2021 unrest, the South African Human Rights Commission has not only pursued the investigation into the unrest, but also spent significant time on this larger question: what is the way forward for South Africa? We are very mindful that the socio-economic circumstances prevailing at the time of the July 2021 unrest in KwaZulu-Natal in particular are replicated throughout the country. After an extensive consultation process that took us to various towns and cities and rural areas, and having had the benefit of wisdom generously shared with us by fellow South Africans, the Commission has constructed a platform called Social Harmony Through National Effort, or as we simply call it, SHINE. SHINE puts us on the path to building a nation whose values accord with those contained in our Bill of Human Rights. SHINE calls upon all of us to do a few simple things. Firstly, practice inner dialogue or self-reflection, as positive change has to begin within ourselves. We are called upon to confront and transcend our bad habits, negative attitudes, and address our collective reliance on and repose to violence through getting real with ourselves. Secondly, SHINE requires us to initiate positive dialogue by holding regular family meetings to inspire greater harmony in our homes, to discuss with the people with whom we share life how we might create more harmony amongst ourselves. And finally, to engage in active learning of the diverse beliefs, cultures, and practices around us. It is only through learning and knowing that we can evolve from mere tolerance of the other towards truly respecting and celebrating even diversities that abound. SHINE challenges us all to make small but meaningful changes. For instance, making a national practice of simply greeting each other is a good way to start this journey. SHINE requires all of us working together in a national effort to make somebody's day every day, to work to bring harmony into our lives through positive dialogue and learning. Social harmony through national effort is a matter of national priority, as it enables us to begin to develop a collective understanding of our traumas and begin the journey to really heal our wounds, thus infusing into our lives the human values of solidarity and compassion for one another. As we build a collective understanding of our pain and trauma and develop the ability to heal, we shall, through individual and collective efforts, be bringing people together in families, neighborhoods, or in the workplace. We must, all of us, be committed to becoming a nation of bridge builders and peacemakers. Positive change in itself, in the home, and in our relationships with each other are the real foundation of a truly great nation, steeped in deep traditions of human rights. We know that by working together we can achieve anything, including avoiding and preventing further events such as occurred in July 2021. If each of us steps up to the plate, who can stop us forging the greatest of nations? SHINE has been designed by the South African Human Rights Commission to answer the big question of what is the way forward for South Africa? No matter how poor, how wealthy, no matter where life has taken you, no matter your gender, your age, your belief, every person in this blessed land can be part of the national effort aimed at building bridges. Together we can shine the way forward to the caring country that Madiba conceived of. It is poverty and disharmony that are the enemy, and to eradicate both. The joy of this is that it is possible. We simply must want to experience and live in this caring and compassionate society that Madiba described for us. He called on us to continue his long walk, and he advised us to keep on course, and that we dare not to tarry. Together, under the SHINE banner, we can reignite the urgency of Madiba's quest for the sake of ourselves and for the sake of our children. Through small efforts on our part, each of us can build this country of giants whose ethos is compassion, a country in which a humane or human rights culture can flourish. You need nothing more than to decide to be part of the national effort to bring about peace and harmony. Development and prosperity, human rights, and all good things can only flourish under such conditions. The SHINE pledge is available on the website of the South African Human Rights Commission at sahrc.org.za, and we encourage everyone to go online and sign up to the SHINE pledge. This then is ultimately the recommendation of the South African Human Rights Commission addressed to every person who hears this message. What is your response to the question, what is the way forward South Africa. And Nkosi kakhulu, thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Acting Chairperson Chauhan, for the way forward. The Commission would now like to take a few moments to extend an acknowledgement of gratitude. And with that being said, I would now like to call our CEO, Mr. Musisi Mkhize, to do the vote of thanks.
It's been a long day, you've been sitting for some time. I have no intention to detain you any further. And therefore, I will do my best to be as brief as possible. May I greet the Chairperson of CRL, the Deputy Chairpersons of both CRL and the Human Rights Commission, the commissioners from both commissions, the colleagues, the media here present, but also all those in attendance today. My task is a simple one, to pass a vote of thanks. This vote of thanks, unfortunately, is a paradox to the situation and the context in which we have met today. In that we want to thank the families whose children, wives, husbands, sisters and brothers paid the highest price during the 2021 July Unrest. And yet we have to say to them, thank you. As then just a brief quote by Madiba about nation building and race relations, he once said, we were expected to destroy one another and ourselves collectively in the West racial conflagration. Instead, we as the people chose the path of negotiation